to work together.
Our great thanks to you, MJ Gohel of the Asia Pacific Foundation. We thank you very much. You focus on security and terrorism issues, and we're glad you could come to visit with us today. Thanks very much. You know, if adults feel insecure, how much more so must children feel? From the first moments of the attack, we have seen one disturbing image after another. The planes piercing those towers, the World Trade Center towers, like flaming arrows. People jumping from buildings that moments later crumbled into a storm of debris. How can we describe to our children what is happening in terms that they understand without taking away the security that they need to feel? We're going to talk about that in just a moment. First, though, let's go back to Jim Clancy and Colleen McEdwards for the latest news on the investigation into the attacks and certainly the search and rescue and recovery mission. Jim and Colleen?
It's a great topic, isn't it, Don? I know a lot of my friends are talking about how they talk to their kids about this. What do you say? What do you do?
You have to be thinking about that and addressing it and talking to your children. Probably get some good tips here in the coming minutes, but let's get up to date with the latest developments in the story itself. Searchers have recovered the cockpit voice recorder from the hijacked plane that crashed in western Pennsylvania. It was recovered at the bottom of a deep crater. Now it's being sent to Washington for analysis. This was the plane that is believed to have crashed after a struggle between passengers and the hijackers.
And in other developments, Congress has passed a joint resolution authorizing President Bush to use military force against those responsible for the attacks.
And authorities say that they've made their first arrest in the investigation, a person who was picked up as a material witness. Well, a resolution was passed by Congress that had been delayed by a dispute over the text. The House finally approved a measure late Friday, 420 to 1, endorsing the president's ability to act militarily. Representative Barbara Lee was the lone dissenter. The California Democrats saying military action will not prevent international terrorism against the U.S. The Senate had already voted unanimously in favor of that resolution. One senator says the body is single-minded in its desire for action.
10 years ago, I helped draft the resolution that George Bush, then president, won the Gulf War with our coalition allies. It was 3 days and 3 nights of ferocious debate on the Senate floor, and it prevailed by only 5 votes. This one is 100 votes. What clear evidence, Senator Levin and I worked on the drafting with our leadership of this, what clear evidence of the unity in the Congress, and the Congress speak for the people of the United States.
Meanwhile, at the request of the Defense Department, Mr. Bush has given the go-ahead for as many as 50,000 National Guardsmen and reservists to assist with so-called homeland defense plans.
And the president got a first-hand look at the site in Lower Manhattan known as Ground Zero. Amid the rubble of the Twin Towers, Mr. Bush spoke to rescue workers who responded patriotically. Take a look.
Go ahead, got it.
I want you all to know it can't go any louder. I want you all to know that America today is on bended knee in prayer for the people whose lives were lost here, for the workers who work here, for the families who mourn. This nation stands with the good people of New York City and New Jersey and Connecticut as we mourn the loss of thousands of our citizens. I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon. The nation sends its love
Harry, by pushing
and compassion
No, sorry.
to everybody who is here.
Cross the line on that one.
Thank you for your hard work. Thank you for making the nation proud. And may God bless America.
let's get back a little bit, folks.
You can imagine what a morale booster that was, because the pressure on those folks, the search, rescue, and recovery teams, has been just unrelenting. The search is a race against the clock to reach anyone who could still be alive in that pile of rubble. For one blind survivor who managed to get down hundreds of feet of stairs in the chaos with his guide dog, memories of that attack still very fresh. Listen.
Was very concerned. I didn't hear the second plane hit, but we knew that at that time something had happened. We figured that a plane had hit the building because I could smell, and we all could smell jet fuel fumes. So we knew there was something going on.
And it is the victims and their families that were the focus of Friday's National Day of Prayer and Remembrance, designated by U.S. President George Bush. At the National Cathedral in Washington, patriotic songs led the way as Mr. Bush joined 4 past presidents and other dignitaries in a display of grief and an attempt to comfort as well. Prayers and services were offered in other churches, synagogues, mosques, and public squares right across the country. In Las Vegas, the bright neon lights dimmed as the Nevada city paid its respects as well. Farther west in the state of Washington, candles flickered at a Seattle vigil to remember the lives lost and affected by those terrorist attacks. Well, it's a struggle for anyone to come to terms with this week's horrible loss of life, but children have to rely on their parents or other adults to help them cope with their grief and their fear. The terrifying nature of these attacks has prompted schools to enlist the helps of counselors for the kids. Thomas Nybo has that.
You want to protect your kids. They're small and the world is big, and sometimes very bad things happen to good people, even when they wear a helmet and look both ways. If things go wrong, horribly wrong, what do you do? On the first day back to class since the attacks, the tragedy was very much on the minds of New Yorkers. For this father, a reminder of how a 7-year-old sees the world.
He was quite intrigued that the Empire State Building is now the second tallest building. And he kept saying that over and over again. So, and that's appropriate. And I had to kind of scale back and not try and lecture him on the significance of the event. He's 7. He's dealing with it the way a 7-year-old should.
For Steve Ross's 13-year-old daughter, a complicated start to a new school year.
It's hard to get now back into the routine. We hadn't figured out a routine to begin with yet, so to try to get back to a routine that was never there is kind of difficult.
Even for someone who's made the United States a recent home, similar issues with her 10-year-old son.
He made up that he was fighting against the terrorists, so he was working with like fake guns at home and hiding behind furniture and just making up like how he will defend the country.
Around the corner, long after classes had ended for the day, a private school for girls held a crash course for parents on how to help your child face the unthinkable. Counselors offered ways to listen when your child isn't speaking.
We have children who are not necessarily the most verbal, some who are not able to articulate things in words. We need to take a look at the drawings they draw, the way they play with their dolls in their room, things that they may be saying to their friends.
We basically shielded her from the whole thing.
Questions from parents looking for ways to explain to their children what really happened.
Terrible evil happened in the world. A very, very bad thing took place. And we're all doing our best to get back to a comfort and a safety.
The final questions come in a flurry. They needed to get home early. It was, after all, a school night. Thomas Nybo, CNN, New York.
And that should be a good opening to this next segment in our discussion, reactions to what's been going on over the last 4 days. Now back to Donna.
Jim, you're so right, and Colleen, thanks very much. We'll carry on with the children. Certainly, you want to protect your children from evil. We do, but it would be really almost impossible to shield them from what's been happening in New York City and Washington. How should we be talking with our children about these tragedies? From Los Angeles, we are joined by child psychologist Robert Butterworth. Dr. Butterworth has assisted radio, TV, and print media since 1984 to try and enhance the understanding, really, of what a child goes through when they get into a psychological issue and the trauma that they face. Dr. Butterworth, thanks for coming to talk with us.
Hello, Donna.
First things first, What do you do? Maybe they've seen the images, so how do you open the door with a child?
Well, first of all, you know why it's so hard? Because for all these adults that are struggling, because in a sense we failed them. You know, we bring these children into the world and we give them this perception that all is well, everyone is good, and all of a sudden something like this happens. So the child that runs up to my wife, who's a teacher, who's 10 years old, it says something like, "What did we do that made them so mad?" Or the other child that is so quiet in the play and won't say anything, but builds little blocks like a tower and then smashes them down.
So they're afraid they're in trouble? Or they've done something?
Well, you know, the problem is that, in a sense, little children don't verbalize. We don't sit and talk like you and I do with little children. They won't talk to you. But what you'll do is get some paper, get some crayons, get some pencils, and say, "Gee, what's been happening on TV?" When they draw, they'll talk. And then you'll find out what they think. And even those kids that aren't talking about it, there's something in their head and they're thinking about it.
Should you force a child to talk if they're not talking to you? Should you try to draw them out?
No, that's why we're using play, because by playing with them, they're having fun anyhow.
At a certain age, like you're saying, the younger kids, you need the paper and crayons. So maybe we could kind of make it age appropriate.
Okay, that's what we're going to talk. Okay, the drawings and the play and all that. We're about 7 and younger. From about 7 to 12. A lot of kids are going to be kind of stuck on one thing. Remember, it used to be with post-traumatic stress that you would get it if you were exposed to it, if you were there, and you couldn't get the image out of your head. But in this new technology, you don't have to be there. You can be exposed in your living room. You're sitting there watching these buildings come down and people jumping. So there are a lot of kids that are quiet, but they want to talk about it. So what you do is you spend a little time, and you know, even at the age of about 7 to 12, they're not going to sit and talk, but maybe at the dinner table, have a little briefing. Everybody goes around the table and says how they feel about it. And if everybody else does it, maybe the kids will start to open up.
One of the most important words, listen, right?
And it's hard, and as we get, especially with the older ones, because the older ones are going to be arguing. Remember, teenagers want action. They want something to happen, and they may be mad at mom and dad. Wait a minute, why didn't you fix this? Or well, let's get them. So there's a lot more anger and a lot more energy and a lot more intensity.
We're going to talk about some of those emotions. Let's get a call in here. Liz from West Virginia, hi.
Hi. When I put my daughter to bed tonight, she just kind of looked at me with tears in her eyes, and she asked me, "Mommy, why does this man hate us so much?" What am I supposed to say to that child? She's only 9.
Bob?
Yeah?
What should she say? She put her daughter to bed, 9 years old. She was in tears saying, "Why does this man hate us so much?" And she wants to know what she can do.
Okay, well, first of all, you have to remember that most of the kids that are going to be having problems are going to be having problems at nighttime. No matter what happens in the daytime, they keep busy. And at night, this is where all the fears come up. You really have to say that there are bad people in the world, but most of the people are good. The people around you are good. The people that, you know, you go to school with are good. And you have to kind of, in a sense, drown out the bad with the good. There's no perfect answer. But by letting them know that their environment and their surroundings are filled with good people, and there are bad people, they can cope because they put it in some sort of perspective. But nighttime is going to be difficult because that's when things get dark. Remember, all the kids' fears come out and all their little fantasies.
Okay, so we talk about fear, loss. Maybe some kids have lost their parents, and I've seen some of the women who are even expecting babies who will never know their fathers. There's hate, there's anger, there's sadness, and I know it depends on the child and depends on the age. What would you recommend to really, is there kind of something that you could, a point that you can start that really makes sense for a lot of kids, that they really will understand to cover a range of emotions?
Well, depending on what the emotion is, because remember with children, when they feel stress, it's completely different than adults. When adults are under stress and depression, they slow down. Kids speed up. So kids are going to be fighting, they're going to be hyper, they're going to have difficulty concentrating. They're also going to have problems physically, appetite. They're going to be crying, they're going to be clinging. So all these things happen with kids, and you just deal with each one at one time. With the food, maybe have different feedings. With the bed, maybe have them sleep closer to you. With the concentration, maybe limit school. But generally with most kids who haven't lost a parent, who haven't been exposed directly to the threat, these things should even off. But Donna, the problem is, in most tragedies, things start to even off, but things are going so fast. We're just finished.